The polished oak of Julian Thorne's desk gleamed under Sarah Jenkins' careful hand. Dust was an enemy in Thorne Manor, an insidious presence that dared to settle on surfaces meant to reflect power and wealth. Her cloth moved in slow, deliberate circles, an extension of her own hidden precision. Every fiber of her being was focused on the task, on the smooth, cool wood, on the scent of aged leather and expensive cleaning solution that permeated the vast study. The air hung heavy and still, thick with the lingering aroma of Julian Thorne's cigars, a scent that spoke of late-night decisions and unseen dangers. Her eyes, a striking hazel, remained fixed on the wood grain, never daring to stray upwards. The unspoken rule was carved into the very walls of the manor, a silent command that all staff knew by heart. Do not look at Mr. Thorne. Do not meet his gaze. It was a rule she followed with absolute, unthinking obedience, even when only his portrait was present. The painting, a formidable depiction of Julian Thorne, dominated one wall, his piercing gray eyes seeming to follow her every movement, even when her own were resolutely downcast. She felt the weight of that painted stare, a cold pressure on the back of her neck, an invisible hand on her shoulder. Her life here was one of careful anonymity, a practiced invisibility she had perfected over years. Each day was a tightrope walk, each chore a performance of demure competence. Her movements were economical, her presence minimal. This vast, opulent house was a gilded cage, its luxury a constant reminder of the world she had left behind. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant clang from the kitchens, every rustle of silk as another maid passed by, was filtered through her heightened senses. She listened always for anything that might disrupt the fragile peace she had built for herself. A flicker of light caught her eye, a stray sunbeam piercing through the heavy velvet drapes to illuminate dancing dust motes, like tiny, lost stars. She hated the dust. It was persistent, always returning, much like the memories she tried so hard to bury. Her slender fingers tightened around the polishing cloth, the rough texture a small comfort against the smooth, cold wood. She moved from the desk to the shelves, running her cloth over the spines of leather-bound books she would never be allowed to open. Each book was a testament to a world of knowledge, a world she had once inhabited with fierce passion. Now she simply cleaned around it. A tremor ran through her, not of fear, but of a deeply buried instinct. It was the whisper of a life she had once known, a life of healing and purpose. She pushed it down, deep, just as she pushed down the scent of antiseptic that sometimes clung to her memories. Sarah Jenkins was a maid now, nothing more. Her past as a veterinarian was a secret, a dangerous vulnerability she guarded with every breath. To reveal it would be to invite scrutiny, to dismantle the careful facade that kept her safe within these intimidating walls. She could not afford to be anything but ordinary. Later that afternoon, the hushed murmurs of the other staff reached her from the servants' hall. Sarah was scrubbing the massive stone floor of the pantry, the abrasive soap and stiff brush a physical challenge she welcomed. It was a simple, repetitive task that allowed her mind to wander, yet kept her grounded in her current reality. The scent of potatoes and root vegetables filled the cool, damp air, a contrast to the rich perfumes of the main house. "Did you hear about the pups?" A voice, low and conspiratorial, sliced through the rhythmic scraping of her brush. It belonged to Martha, one of the older maids, whose eyes often held a wary glint. "Which ones?" another asked, her tone equally subdued. "The ones from Brutus?" Sarah's movements faltered for a fraction of a second. Brutus, Julian Thorne's prize guard dog, a formidable beast, powerful and territorial, kept in the kennels at the far end of the property. Brutus was less a dog and more a force of nature, a creature bred for intimidation and protection. Her mind, despite her efforts to suppress it, immediately conjured an image of the massive animal. "Yes, Brutus's litter," Martha continued, her voice dropping to an almost inaudible whisper. "They say one of them isn't doing well. Liam found it this morning, barely breathing." A cold knot formed in Sarah's stomach. Liam O'Connell, Julian's head of security, was a man of action, not sentiment. If Liam had noticed a pup's distress, its condition must be dire indeed. Her grip tightened on the brush handle. She forced herself to focus on the grime on the flagstones, the hard work of physical anchor against the rising tide of professional concern. She was a maid, as she cleaned. She did not involve herself in the affairs of the household beyond her duties, especially not with the monks. They tried to give it some tonic, I think, the second maid whispered, a hint of unease in her voice. But it just got worse. Barely moving, they said. Julian won't be pleased if it does. The casual cruelty in their tone, the detached concern for Julian's reaction rather than the animal itself, struck Sarah like a physical blow. Her heart ached with an old, familiar pang. It was a pain she had tried to numb for so long, a compassion she had forced into dormancy. She pushed the mop bucket, its metal rim scraping against the stone, a small, rebellious noise in the quiet hall. She pretended not to listen, to be entirely absorbed in her work. Heard Liam say it would probably be gone by morning, Martha added with a sigh, as if discussing a broken piece of china. A shame, those dogs are expensive. Gone by morning. The words echoed in Sarah's mind, sharp and clear. Her hands began to tremble almost imperceptibly. A dying animal. A pup, barely weeks old. The thought clawed at her, tearing at the carefully constructed walls around her heart. It was a call to action she hadn't heard in years, a siren song from her buried past. Her old life, her true self, screamed at the injustice, at the casual disregard for a creature's suffering. She knew with an unwelcome certainty that a tonic administered by kennel staff was unlikely to save a critically ill animal. Her training, her years of experience, told her that much. She finished her pantry duties, her movements stiff, almost robotic. The image of a small, struggling life, abandoned to its fate, haunted her. Every floorboard she scrubbed, every surface she polished, felt like a betrayal. She moved through the manor like a ghost, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. The risk, the rules, the absolute, undeniable danger of exposing herself. But then the image of a small, fragile body, growing colder, growing stiller. As dusk settled, painting the narrow Gothic windows of Thorne Manor in shades of bruised purple and gray, Sarah completed her final rounds. The last task of the day was to ensure all the ground floor windows were latched, the heavy drapes drawn, and the lights dimmed in the less used corridors. The manor became a different beast at night, its opulence giving way to long, deep shadows, its hushed atmosphere turning into an almost palpable silence. The scent of old wood was stronger, deeper, carrying an undercurrent of something metallic, something old and secret. Her heart hammered a quiet, insistent rhythm against her ribs. The decision had solidified in her mind, a stark, undeniable imperative. She could not let it die, not if there was even a whisper of a chance. She was driven by an instinct far older and more powerful than any fear of Julian Thorne or his rules. It was the sacred oath she had once taken, the purpose that had defined her entire adult life. She made her way to the back entrance, her steps light and swift, barely a whisper on the worn stone floor. The night air hit her with a sudden chill as she slipped outside, pulling her threadbare cardigan tighter around her slender frame. The moon, a thin crescent, offered little light, casting the grounds in deep, inky shadows. The scent of damp earth and pine needles filled her nostrils, a temporary reprieve from the enclosed, heavy air of the manor. The kennels were a detached stone outbuilding, partially obscured by a thicket of overgrown trees. It stood apart, a place of raw, untamed instinct, distinct from the polished facade of the main house. The closer she got, the stronger the animal scent became, a pungent mix of tied straw and something else, something sharper, something almost medicinal, but poorly applied. Her professional senses, long dormant, were now fully alert, analyzing every nuance of the air. She reached the heavy wooden door, her fingers hesitating on the cold metal latch. It was surprisingly quiet. Usually the kennels hummed with the low growls and restless movements of the guard dogs, their powerful presence a constant reminder of Julian Thorne's vigilant protection. Tonight there was only a low, intermittent whine, a sound of profound distress that went straight to Sarah's core. She pushed the door open just enough to slip inside, closing it softly behind her. The interior was utilitarian, bare concrete floors, sturdy steel cages lining the walls. A single weak bulb hung from the ceiling, casting long, grotesque shadows. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of animal, but also something else now. The cloying sweetness of illness, the sharp tang of sickness. Her eyes, accustomed to the dimness, swept over the cages. Most were empty, the dogs out on their night patrols, or perhaps contained in the larger outdoor runs. Only a few remained, and in one, a massive dark shape stirred. It was Brutus. His cage was larger than the others, a testament to his status. He lifted his head, his deep-set eyes, usually burning with an aggressive intelligence, now held a dull, tired sheen. He let out a low rumble, a sound that in any other circumstance would send Sarah fleeing, but tonight it held a note of resignation, of profound sadness. He barely seemed to notice her, his gaze fixed on a small, huddled shape at the far corner of his cage. Sarah's breath hitched in her throat. There it was, a tiny, almost invisible bundle of fur, barely larger than her hand. It lay motionless on a pile of straw, its small body quivering with a feverish intensity. She approached the cage slowly, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the quiet kennel. The smell of sickness was stronger now, undeniable. She knelt, pressing her face against the cold steel bars, her eyes straining to see in the dim light. The puppy was a dark brindle, a miniature version of its formidable father. Its breathing was shallow and ragged, each tiny gasp a desperate struggle. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through its small frame. Its coat was matted, its nose dry and crusty. It was clearly dehydrated, its eyes sunken and dull. A tiny whimper, like a breath of wind, escaped its lips. Sarah's fingers locked around the cold metal of the cage, the unyielding steel pressing into her skin. Her mind, no longer suppressing her past, raced through a rapid-fire diagnosis. Respiratory distress, undoubtedly. Possibly pneumonia, given the cold and the kennel conditions. Dehydration, secondary infection. It was textbook, tragically familiar. Her professional instincts, buried for so long, surged to the forefront, overpowering everything else. She could almost feel the small, weak pulse under her fingertips, could almost hear the wet, gurgling sounds in its tiny lungs. Brutus, the formidable guard dog, watched her with an unsettling stillness. His low rumble had ceased. His gaze, fixed on his offspring, shifted briefly to Sarah, then back to the pup. There was no aggression, no warning, only a profound, silent anguish that resonated with Sarah's own. The mother dog knew. She knew her pup was dying. A wave of overwhelming grief washed over Sarah. This tiny life, so utterly vulnerable, so carelessly neglected. Her heart ached with a physical pain, a deep, visceral response she had thought long extinguished. She saw not just a sick puppy, but a symbol of her own lost purpose, a mirror reflecting the helplessness she had once felt. Her eyes welled with hot tears, blurring the already dim image of the struggling pup. She bit her lip, tasting the coppery tang of blood, a small, fierce act of defiance against the tears. She could not cry. Not here. Not now. Tears were a luxury she could not afford. She had to think. She had to act. This was not a job for a maid. This was a job for a veterinarian. Her hands, once so skilled, so confident, ached to reach out, to touch, to assess, to heal. The knowledge, the training, the years of dedicated study all came rushing back, a torrent she could no longer hold back. The smell of the kennel, the faint whimper of the pup, the silent, desperate plea in Brutus's eyes. It all coalesced into a single, undeniable truth. The puppy would die without immediate, skilled intervention. It was a certainty that chilled her to the bone, yet ignited a spark of fierce determination within her. The danger to herself, the potential revelation of her hidden past, suddenly seemed insignificant in the face of this tiny, struggling life. The choice was clear, agonizingly so. She had to help. The years of suppressing her true identity, of burying her skills, of living in careful anonymity, now collided head-on with a moral imperative she could not, would not ignore. Her past, carefully concealed, was no longer a matter of choice. It was demanding to be confronted. The image of the small, struggling body refused to leave Sarah's mind. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw the puppy's labored breathing, the slight tremor in its tiny limbs. Sleep was a distant, mocking whisper throughout the long night. She lay rigid in her narrow maid's bed, the coarse linen scratching against her skin, a physical discomfort mirroring the turmoil in her thoughts. Her room, usually a sanctuary of quiet anonymity, felt like a cage, every shadow a judgment. The cold stone walls of Thorne Manor seemed to press in on her, amplifying the silence, which was only broken by the distant chime of a grandfather clock in the main hall. Each tick was a sharp, accusing sound, counting down the puppy's remaining hours. Her lungs ached with every silent breath she took, a sharp pain echoing the puppy's ragged gasps from her memory. Each beat of her heart felt like a drum, announcing her impending doom if she chose to act, or her profound failure if she did not. She remembered the feel of the puppy's fur, soft despite its sickness, beneath her gloved fingers. Its warmth was fading even then, a terrifying sign. Her hands, usually so steady with a needle or a scalpel, now trembled slightly as she clenched them beneath a thin blanket. The memory of that desperate helplessness, that raw vulnerability, clawed at her. For years she had buried her true self, her skilled hands, her instincts honed by years of dedication. She had become Sarah Jenkins, the quiet, efficient maid, invisible and unremarkable. The mask had been heavy, but it had kept her safe. Now that mask felt suffocating. The moral imperative to save a life, any life, warred fiercely with the ingrained fear of exposure. Julian Thorne's rules were absolute, his authority unquestioned. Servants were to be seen as little as possible, heard never, and certainly not to interfere with his affairs, especially not with his prized, dangerous animals. To defy him, to reveal her true capabilities, felt like a death wish. But to let an innocent creature suffer and perish when she possessed the knowledge and skill to prevent it, it felt like a death of another kind, a betrayal of everything she once was. She shifted, the rustle of the sheets loud in the oppressive quiet. The scent of old disinfectant from her morning cleaning lingered faintly in the air, a cruel reminder of her current, mundane existence. Her hazel eyes stared into the gloom, searching for an answer that would satisfy both her conscience and her need for survival. There was no easy path. One way led to potential discovery and dire consequences, the other to a guilt that would surely haunt her waking hours. As the first sliver of gray light filtered through the heavy curtains, Sarah rose, her body stiff, her mind exhausted but resolved. She moved through her morning routine like a phantom, her thoughts still consumed by the small, fragile life. The clatter of plates, the hushed murmurs of other staff, the strong aroma of brewing coffee, all registered as distant, unimportant details. Her true focus lay elsewhere, in the detached stone building behind the manor, where the sharp scent of animal and despair now lingered in her imagination. She knew the kennel staff. They were burly men, trained in handling powerful dogs, not in intricate veterinary care. Their methods were often direct, sometimes brutal, always lacking the gentle precision required for a delicate, ailing creature. She needed to see for herself, to confirm her fears, to give her conscience the undeniable proof it demanded. During her assigned duties, which included tidying the exterior grounds, Sarah subtly altered her route. She made sure her path brought her within sight of the kennels, feigning an interest in a stray weed or a patch of uneven gravel. From a distance, she could observe. Liam O'Connell, Julian's head of security, was a formidable presence. His broad shoulders and watchful gaze were constant. He was often near the kennels, overseeing the care of the formidable guard dogs. Today, he was there, his silhouette stark against the morning light. She watched as a younger kennel hand, a burly man named Thomas, approached the enclosure where the mother dog and her sick pup were kept. Thomas carried a large bowl of food, its metallic clatter echoing in the crisp morning air. He placed it down with a thud, his movements heavy and unrefined. The mother dog, a massive beast with watchful, intelligent eyes, sniffed at the food, then turned her head away, her focus entirely on her whimpering offspring. Thomas sighed, a sound of frustration that carried even to Sarah's distant ears. He then knelt, somewhat awkwardly, and attempted to coax the puppy. Sarah saw him touch the pup, his large hand clumsy, lacking the sensitive touch a veterinarian would employ. He seemed to prod it rather than examine it. He then poured a thick, greenish liquid from a bottle into a smaller bowl, and tried to force it towards the puppy's nose. The pup recoiled, a weak, pitiful sound escaping its throat. Sarah's stomach clenched. That liquid, she surmised, was likely a general-purpose antibiotic, probably a broad-spectrum veterinary drug, but administered without any precision or diagnosis. It was a shot in the dark, a desperate measure, and clearly ineffective. She noticed the slight swelling around the puppy's abdomen, the dullness in its eyes, the way its tiny ribs protruded despite its bloated belly. These were not mere surface wounds or a common cold. This was something far more serious, something requiring surgical precision, or at the very least, a nuanced understanding of internal medicine. Thomas stood up, wiping his hands on his trousers. He exchanged a few gruff words with Liam, who simply nodded, his expression unreadable. Liam's gaze swept across the grounds, momentarily pausing near Sarah's position. She quickly bent, pretending to scrutinize a stubborn patch of weeds, her heart thumping against her ribs like a trapped bird. She straightened only when she felt his attention had moved on. The brief observation confirmed every fear she had harbored. They were trying in their own rough way, but they lacked the specific knowledge, the gentle hand, the diagnostic eye. The puppy was dying, not for lack of care, but for lack of appropriate care. They were simply unaware of what else to do. This realization hardened her resolve. She had to act. The risk was immense, but the alternative was unbearable. Her mind, once clouded by doubt, now shifted into a mode of cold, analytical planning. As a maid, her access to medical supplies was non-existent. The Manor's medical kit, she knew, was kept under lock and key in the head housekeeper's office, used only for minor scrapes or headaches among the staff. It would not contain what she needed. She would have to improvise, to pilfer, to create. She began to mentally catalog the Manor's vast, sprawling interior, searching for unlikely treasures. The laundry room, perhaps. Could she find some clean, unused bandages among the linen stores? Maybe an old bottle of antiseptic, even something as simple as rubbing alcohol, hidden away in a forgotten cupboard. The kitchen might yield a clean, sharp knife, one that could be sterilized. Or perhaps the sewing room, a place she frequented for mending Julian's fine clothes. A needle, strong and sharp, for sutures. She would need a thread as well, fine and resilient. Her thoughts raced, piecing together a mental inventory of potential tools. A syringe. That was the most difficult item. A proper veterinary syringe would be impossible to obtain. Could she fashion something similar? A small dropper, perhaps, from the old apothecary jars in the dusty attic, if she could find a way to access it without permission. The idea felt insane, desperate, but her mind clung to it. The sheer impossibility of it only fueled her determination. She considered the logistics. She would need to work under the cover of darkness, when the Manor was quietest, when the night watchmen were making their rounds, creating brief windows of opportunity. The kennels were somewhat isolated, but not entirely. Security cameras were present, but she had learned their blind spots during her long, repetitive cleaning routines. She had observed the angles, the slight distortions, the places where a shadow could linger just a moment too long without being noticed. The cold, metallic tang of fear was still present, a constant companion. It mingled with the sharp, almost clinical focus that now dominated her thoughts. This was the sensation of stepping back into her old skin, the skin of a professional, albeit a disgraced one. The adrenaline started to hum beneath her skin, not just from fear, but from the resurgence of purpose. Her hands, no longer trembling, began to move with a renewed sense of direction, organizing her small maid's cart, preparing for her afternoon duties. But her mind was elsewhere, constructing a mental map of Thorne Manor, plotting routes, identifying potential obstacles, and calculating risks. Every nook and cranny, every forgotten cupboard, every dimly lit corridor became a resource, a possibility. She thought of the tiny puppy, fighting for each breath. Its mother, a fierce protector, would be another obstacle, but also a potential ally if Sarah could earn her trust. The risks of being bitten, of being caught, of facing Julian Thorne's wrath were enormous. Her life in Thorne Manor, already precarious, could end in an instant, or worse, in a way she dared not contemplate. But the image of the puppy, so small and helpless, so utterly dependent, pushed all rational fear aside. Her past, the reason for her hiding, the pain that had driven her into this life of anonymity, now seemed less important than the present moment. The oath she had taken, though broken by circumstances, still resonated deep within her. To alleviate suffering, to save a life, it was not a choice, it was an imperative. A cold, hard resolve settled in her chest, pushing out the last vestiges of doubt. Her eyes, usually downcast, now held a fierce, unwavering light. She knew what she had to do. The decision was made. Sarah would save the puppy, fully aware that detection could mean severe consequences, even death, within the manor's formidable walls. The night wrapped around Thorne Manor like a thick, dark blanket. Sarah moved through the hushed halls, her breath a shallow whisper in the heavy air. Each creak of the old wood underfoot felt like a shout, every distant chime of the grandfather clock a tolling bell. She clutched a small, nondescript cloth bag against her side, its contents a forbidden treasure that could seal her fate. Inside, a pilfered first aid kit and a stolen syringe pressed cold against her hip. Her fingers tightened around the fabric, a desperate anchor against the rising tide of fear. The thought of the tiny, suffering creature in the kennel propelled her forward. Its ragged breathing, the desperate plea in its eyes, had pierced through the layers of her carefully constructed anonymity. She had sworn off this life, vowed to bury her past deep beneath the mundane duties of a maid. Yet, the instinct to heal, to alleviate pain, was a current too strong to resist, a part of her very being that simply would not die. The scent of old stone and damp earth grew stronger as she slipped through a hidden servant's exit. The air outside was sharper, carrying the chill of late autumn. A sliver of moon peeked through heavy clouds, casting long, dancing shadows that played tricks on her eyes. Every rustle of leaves sounded like a footstep, every hoot of an owl like a warning. She hugged the shadows, her dark uniform blending into the night, a silent phantom gliding towards the kennel. The detached stone building loomed ahead, a fortress for fierce animals. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat urging her on, yet also screaming caution. She pushed open the heavy wooden door to the kennel, its muted groan echoing in the stillness. A familiar, earthy smell, a mix of animal and disinfectant, greeted her. Inside, the dim light from a single low-wattage bulb cast long shadows, revealing rows of sturdy steel cages. In the farthest corner, she saw the massive form of the mother dog, Onyx, a creature of formidable power curled protectively around her litter. Onyx, a beast usually prone to snarling at any unfamiliar face, lifted her head, her steely eyes, the color of wet coal, fixed on Sarah with an unnerving stillness. Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. This was the most dangerous animal in the manor, a loyal guardian whose ferocity was legendary. Yet there was no growl, no baring of teeth, only an intense, almost knowing gaze that seemed to pierce through Sarah's disguise. Sarah took a slow, deliberate breath, trying to steady her trembling hands. She knew better than to make eye contact, even with an animal in this place. But Onyx's stare was too profound to ignore entirely. She met it for a fleeting second, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Then, Sarah lowered her gaze, her focus shifting entirely to the tiny, struggling life nestled beside the powerful mother. The puppy was barely visible, a small bundle of dark fur, twitching weakly. Its breaths were shallow, rattling gasps that tore at Sarah's soul. She remembered the warmth of healthy puppies in her arms, the vibrant life that pulsed through their small bodies. This one was fading, its energy draining away like sand through an hourglass. Carefully, Sarah knelt before the cage, her movements slow and deliberate, as if not to startle the mother. She spoke in a low, soothing murmur, a sound she hadn't made in years, a voice reserved for the sick and vulnerable. "Hello there, little one," she whispered, her voice husky with emotion. "I'm here to help." Onyx remained still, her gaze unwavering, a silent sentinel. Sarah unzipped her bag, retrieving a small penlight and a few sterile swabs. Her hands, though outwardly steady, remembered the years of practice, the precision required. The moment she touched the syringe, a phantom echo of her past life surged through her veins. It was a muscle memory, a deeply ingrained skill that had been dormant for too long. She cleaned a small patch on the puppy's thin leg, her touch feather-light. The puppy whimpered, a sound so faint it was almost imperceptible. Sarah felt a pang in her chest, a familiar ache of empathy. She loaded the syringe with a precise dose of a broad-spectrum antibiotic and a tiny amount of pain relief. Her mind, once cluttered with the mansion's rules and her fear of discovery, now narrowed to a singular, intense focus. This was her world, her craft, her purpose. With practiced ease, she found the vein, a delicate blue line beneath the thin skin. She inserted the needle, a faint prick that caused another tiny whimper. Her years of training, the countless hours spent in clinics and operating rooms, guided her every move. She administered the medication slowly, steadily, watching the tiny drop disappear into the fragile body. It felt both terrifying and profoundly natural, like breathing after holding her breath for years. As she withdrew the needle, a drop of clear liquid beaded on the puppy's fur. Sarah gently wiped it away with a fresh swab. She then placed a small, sterile dressing over the injection site. Onyx, the fierce guardian, watched the entire process with an intensity that made Sarah's skin prickle. It was a silent judgment, a raw trust, or perhaps a primal understanding that transcended species. Sarah felt a profound connection to the mother dog in that moment, a shared desperation to save this precious life. She then produced a small, sterile cloth and gently wiped the puppy's eyes and nose, clearing the discharge that had crusted around them. The puppy stirred, a tiny tremor running through its body. Its breathing, while still shallow, seemed to ease just a fraction, a barely discernible change that only her trained eye could detect. Hope, fragile and terrifying, began to bloom in her chest. Sarah sat back on her heels, observing the puppy intently. She checked its gums, pressing gently with a gloved finger. They were still pale, but perhaps not quite as starkly white as before. She listened carefully to its chest, trying to discern any improvement in the labored breathing. The silence in the kennel was heavy, punctuated only by the soft, rhythmic breaths of the adult dogs. Onyx nudged her nose gently towards the puppy, then looked at Sarah, a silent question in her dark eyes. Sarah offered a soft, reassuring whisper. "He's going to be okay for now, Onyx. I've given him something to help with the pain and infection." She knew the dog could not understand her words, but perhaps it could understand the intent, the care in her voice. A wave of exhaustion washed over Sarah. The adrenaline that had fueled her actions began to recede, leaving her feeling wrung out and vulnerable. She had done what she could, risked everything for this small, vulnerable life. The immediate crisis was averted, but she knew this was only a temporary reprieve. Her internal voice, the vet's voice, was already cataloging the remaining symptoms, calculating the next steps. The antibiotic would begin to fight the infection, and the pain relief would offer some comfort. This was a crucial first step, buying precious time. But the puppy's condition was still precarious. Its underlying weakness, the slow fading of its life force, spoke of something more profound than a simple infection. She saw the signs of severe dehydration and malnourishment, perhaps even an internal issue that her current limited tools could not address. She packed away her makeshift medical supplies, her movements slow and deliberate. As she rose, Onyx let out a low, soft whine, a sound of almost maternal concern. Sarah looked at the powerful dog, a flicker of understanding passing between them. "I'll be back," she promised, her voice barely audible. "I will do what I can." As Sarah made her way back through the darkened manor, the small improvement in the puppy lingered in her mind. A flicker of life, a less labored breath, a slight warmth returning to its tiny body. It was a small victory, a fragile hope that ignited a spark within her long-dormant professional self. But the knot of dread in her stomach remained, a constant reminder. This first aid was merely a band-aid. The real battle for the puppy's life, the complex, dangerous fight, was yet to come. More drastic measures, more specialized care, were desperately needed, and she had no idea how she would acquire them. A quiet hope had settled over Sarah, fragile and hesitant like the puppy's shallow breaths. She had seen a faint light in its eyes, a tiny flicker of resistance against the darkness claiming it. The small creature had stirred, perhaps even whimpered softly, a sound that had resonated deep within her chest. She had spent the rest of the night beside it, her hand resting gently on its small, warm body, feeling the uneven pulse beneath her fingers. The massive mother dog, surprisingly still, had watched them both from a corner, an ancient, knowing patience in her gaze. Morning brought a cruel deception. For a few hours, the puppy seemed to rally. Its breathing grew steadier, the slight tremors in its limbs quieted, and it even managed to swallow a few drops of water Sarah offered. A wave of profound relief washed over her, a warmth spreading through her veins that momentarily eclipsed the fear of discovery. She allowed herself a fleeting, dangerous thought. Perhaps she had done enough. Perhaps the antibiotics and pain relief would be sufficient. This fragile peace, however, proved short-lived. By midday, a subtle shift occurred, then a rapid, sickening decline. The puppy's tiny body, which had felt warm, now grew alarmingly hot to the touch. Its eyes, moments before holding that spark of life, became glazed and distant. A low, continuous whine escaped its throat, a sound of pure agony that tore at Sarah's heart. She knew this sound, this particular lament of a creature in profound internal distress. A cold dread began to seep into her bones, chilling her from the inside out. She lifted the puppy gently, turning it to examine its pale gums, its distended abdomen. Her experienced fingers probed delicately, seeking the source of the hidden torment. Each touch brought a fresh, sharp cry from the pup, confirming her worst fears. There was an obstruction, or perhaps a severe infection that had localized, creating a pocket of agonizing pressure. The antibiotics, while slowing the general infection, could not touch this specific internal wound. This was not a simple illness anymore. This was a critical, life-threatening emergency. A desperate scramble of thoughts began in her mind, a frantic search through years of veterinary training. Her internal monologue raced, listing symptoms, possible diagnoses, and most importantly, the necessary interventions. She needed more than just pills and injections. She needed to see inside, to release the pressure, to repair whatever had gone wrong. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. The crude supplies she had pilfered were utterly insufficient for what lay ahead. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the kennel. She looked around the utilitarian space, at the strong steel bars, the concrete floor, the few scattered blankets. There was nothing here, absolutely nothing that could aid her now. Her hands, so skilled and precise, felt useless, bound by the lack of proper tools. The metallic tang of fear filled her mouth, sharp and bitter. She knew what she had to do, but the means to do it felt impossibly out of reach. The image of her old surgical kit, gleaming and precise, flashed before her eyes. The scalpels, the forceps, the clamps, all the instruments that had once been extensions of her will, now belonged to a past life, a forgotten identity. Here she was just Sarah, the maid, forbidden to make eye contact, let alone wield a surgical blade. The irony was a cruel twist of the knife in her own gut. Her very presence in this place was a denial of her true self, and now that denial threatened to cost an innocent life. The puppy cried out again, a weak, gasping sound that tore at her resolve. She cradled its small, suffering body against her chest, feeling the frantic thump of its tiny heart against her palm. Its struggle was becoming more pronounced, its breath shallower, each one a fight for survival. She could not stand by and watch it die, not when she knew with absolute certainty how to save it. The moral imperative, a fire that had always burned within her, now flared into an inferno, consuming all caution. She had heard whispers among the older staff about an abandoned shed on the far edge of the manor grounds, a place rarely visited. It had once belonged to the estate's groundskeeper from decades past, a man rumored to have had a strange interest in taxidermy and ancient remedies. Perhaps, just perhaps, something useful might remain there, some forgotten relic of a bygone era that could serve her purpose. It was a desperate, foolish hope, but desperation leaves little room for reason. The risk was immense. Leaving the manor's immediate vicinity, especially during daylight hours, would be a flagrant breach of the rigid rules. Discovery would mean immediate dismissal, or worse, a direct confrontation with Julian Thorne himself. The thought of his piercing gray eyes, cold and analytical, filled her with a familiar terror. But the image of the puppy, suffering and fading, eclipsed even that profound fear. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, steeling herself, her resolve solidified, a cold, hard knot in her stomach. She gently laid the puppy back down, covering it with a soft cloth. The mother dog watched her, its gaze intense, almost understanding. Sarah met its eyes for a fleeting second, a silent promise passing between them. Then she moved. She had to be quick, invisible. A ghost flitting through the opulent prison. She slipped out of the kennel, her movements fluid and practiced, her maid's uniform blending into the muted tones of the manor's exterior. The air was crisp and cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke. Her ears were acutely tuned to every sound, the distant hum of a lawnmower, the faint clatter of dishes from the kitchen, the caw of a crow overhead. Each sound was a potential threat, a signal of watchful eyes. She kept to the overgrown path that skirted the formal gardens, her head bowed, her gaze fixed on the ground ahead of her. The gravel crunched softly under her worn shoes, a sound that seemed deafening in the otherwise hushed surroundings. Her heart beat a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a constant reminder of the danger she was in. Every shadow seemed to stretch and twist, becoming a potential observer, a silent sentinel waiting to report her transgression. The path grew narrower, the trees denser, their branches interlacing overhead to form a dappled canopy. She pushed through thickets of overgrown shrubs, the rough leaves scratching at her uniform, leaving faint trails on her skin. The fear was a constant companion, a cold hand gripping her stomach, but it was overshadowed by a burning urgency. The puppy was dying, and she was its only hope. After what felt like an eternity, but was likely only 10 minutes, the shed materialized through the foliage. It was a dilapidated structure, mostly obscured by ivy and climbing roses that had long since run wild. The wood was warped and rotting, the small, grimy window panes broken and patched with scraps of metal. It looked forgotten, abandoned, a place where time had simply ceased to move. A thin, almost palpable layer of dust seemed to cling to everything around it. She approached cautiously, her hand reaching for the rusty metal latch. It groaned in protest as she lifted it, the sound echoing unnaturally loud in the quiet afternoon. The door itself was heavy, stiff on its hinges, and she had to put her shoulder into it to force it open. A gust of stale, musty air, thick with the scent of decaying wood and long undisturbed earth, billowed out to meet her. The interior was a cavern of shadows, even in the filtered daylight. Dust motes danced in the sparse beams of light that pierced the broken windows, swirling like tiny forgotten galaxies. Old, forgotten tools hung from pegs on the walls, rusted spades, broken rakes, coils of ancient rope. Shelves lined one wall, burdened with cracked terracotta pots, empty seed packets, and various unlabeled tins. It was a graveyard of forgotten utility. Sarah stepped inside, her eyes scanning the chaotic scene, her heart sinking with each passing second. This was even more hopeless than she had imagined. How could anything useful survive in such disarray? Her gaze swept over the dusty shelves, moving past the gardening implements, the broken furniture, the general detritus of neglect. A wave of despair washed over her, heavy and cold. She was running out of time, and this shed offered no salvation. Then, hidden behind a stack of mildewed burlap sacks, something caught her eye. It was a small wooden crate, surprisingly intact compared to its surroundings. It looked different, more deliberate, not simply discarded like everything else. A faint tremor of renewed hope, a tiny spark in the encroaching darkness, ignited within her. She moved towards it, her fingers brushing away cobwebs that clung to her uniform. She pulled the crate out, its weight a surprising heft. The wood was dark, almost black with age, and felt smooth beneath her fingertips. A small, tarnished brass latch held the lid securely. With careful, almost reverent hands, she unfastened it. It clicked open with a soft, metallic whisper, a sound that seemed to hold its breath. Inside, nestled amongst layers of ancient yellowed cotton batting, was a metal box. It was an old-fashioned first aid kit, likely from a time when home remedies and basic surgical interventions were more common. The metal was tarnished, its once bright finish dulled by decades of neglect, but it was undeniably a medical kit. Her breath caught in her throat. Could it be? Her fingers, trembling slightly, reached for the lid. It sprang open with a faint groan of rusted hinges, revealing its contents. A gasp escaped her lips, a sound of pure, unadulterated shock and a desperate, fragile joy. There they were. Laid out on a bed of faded velvet, surprisingly well-preserved, were basic surgical instruments. A pair of small, curved forceps, a slender scalpel handle with a few unused blades still in their sterile wrappers, a needle holder, and several lengths of fine silver suture material. They were old, undoubtedly. Some showed faint signs of rust, a reddish tinge along their edges, but they were recognizably surgical tools. They were crude compared to the precision instruments she was accustomed to, but they were instruments nonetheless. Her heart pounded in her chest, a mixture of profound relief and an overwhelming sense of dread. She had found what she needed, but the true challenge, the impossible task, now loomed before her. She carefully lifted one of the scalpel blades, its edge still surprisingly sharp. The cold metal felt familiar in her grasp, a tangible link to the person she once was, the professional she had buried. Her mind immediately began to calculate, to plan the sterilization process, the precise steps of the procedure. But even as her professional mind took over, a cold wave of realization washed over her. She was alone. There would be no assistant, no anesthesiologist, no sterile operating room. It would be just her, the dying puppy, and these ancient, rusty tools. The sheer magnitude of the task, the audacity of it, threatened to overwhelm her. Wind tore through the ancient trees of Thorne Manor. Rain lashed the kennel windows, a constant drumbeat against the glass. Distant thunder rumbled, shaking the isolated outbuilding. Sarah Jenkins moved with quiet urgency, her hands trembling, her heart beating a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She had chosen this night hoping the tempest would mask her actions. It might hide any sound from the tiny patient or any suspicious activity. The kennel air was thick with damp earth and animal, mixed with the antiseptic she had sprayed. The small puppy lay on a makeshift operating table, a sturdy crate draped in clean white cloth. Its breathing was shallow, a ragged whisper that tore at her soul. Sarah knelt, her gaze fixed on the fragile creature. Its tiny chest rose and fell with agonizing slowness, each breath fading. Her fingers, usually steady, trembled as she reached for the rusty medical kit. She had spent hours cleaning each instrument, scrubbing away grime. An alcohol lamp taken from the manor's attic cast a flickering glow over her work. Shadows danced like specters. Each implement felt heavy and alien in her grasp, unlike the sterile tools she once used with expertise. There was a scalpel, its blade sharpened on a stable whetstone. Forceps, slightly bent, and a handful of needles, some dull, some sharp. She arranged them on a clean towel in a familiar surgical order. This ritual was muscle memory, a habit offering calm in her swirling fear. Her mind raced, replaying anatomy lessons, procedures, moments of her past. She remembered the operating room's warmth, the hum of machines, colleagues nearby. Now only cold, storm, and the puppy's struggle remained. A hot tear traced her cheek, not for herself, but for the tiny life. She thought of the risks. Mr. Thorne tolerated no insubordination. A maid did not touch his dogs, let alone operate. Such skills were not for her. Her past, her anonymity, would shatter if discovered. But looking at the shivering puppy, eyes half closed, she knew she had no choice. Her veterinary oath, unspoken for years, echoed in her bones. She pulled on thin latex gloves found in a cleaning closet. The material felt cool, an almost forgotten sensation. Gently, she swabbed a patch of the puppy's skin with antiseptic. The puppy whimpered softly, piercing her heart. "Hold on, little one," she whispered. "Just a little longer. You are strong." Her voice was a low hum against the storm's roar. The massive mother dog, curled in a corner, watched Sarah with unnerving stillness. Its huge, dark eyes reflected the flickering lamp. There was no aggression, only a deep understanding. The mother seemed to know Sarah was there to help. This unspoken trust was a heavy weight, a silent plea fueling Sarah's resolve. She took a deep, shuddering breath, filling her lungs with cold, damp air. Her hands steadied, a quiet miracle of will over fear. This was it. She picked up the scalpel. Its cold handle felt familiar. The blade gleamed under the lamplight. Her focus narrowed to the small, vulnerable body. The world outside, the storm, the manor, Julian Thorne, all faded. Only the puppy, the task, and desperate hope for life remained. With surgeon's precision, Sarah made the first incision. It was shallow, delicate, a tiny line on the puppy's soft belly. A bead of dark blood welled instantly. She blotted it carefully with gauze. The smell of warm, coppery blood filled her nostrils. It was a familiar smell, once defining her professional life, now a terrifying secret. Her brow furrowed in intense concentration. Every nerve was alive, every thought dedicated to the intricate work. She felt the skin's resistance, then the yielding muscle. Her fingers worked with unconscious grace. The puppy gasped softly, a fragile sound, but did not stir. The sedatives held it in a tenuous sleep. Sarah's eyes, usually downcast, were now wide open, piercing and sharp. She scanned every detail of the exposed flesh. She spoke to the puppy in hushed tones, guiding her hands, narrating the steps to a silent assistant. Seconds stretched into an eternity. She located the problem, a small, twisted knot of tissue causing the blockage. It was as feared, a complex internal issue kennel staff could not have treated. Cold sweat beaded her forehead despite the kennel's chill. She worked against time, against the odds, against the impossibility. Just as she prepared a crucial cut, blinding lightning illuminated the kennel. Thunder deafened, a visceral shock rattling the building. The alcohol lamp flickered violently, its flame dancing, threatening to die. Sarah flinched, her hand freezing midair, breath catching. Then the overhead bulb sputtered with a sickening groan. It flickered again, a dying gasp, plunging the room into near darkness. The alcohol lamp's small flame barely lit the puppy. The main manor went dark too. The storm had claimed the power. Terror washed over Sarah. Her surgical environment vanished. The sudden, profound darkness disoriented her. Her heart hammered against her ribs. A frantic bird. Blood pounded in her ears, louder than the storm. How could she continue without light? Panic threatened to consume her. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to regain control. Her training screamed to stop, to wait. But the puppy would not wait. Its life was in her hands. She could not abandon it. Not now, so close. Its struggling breaths, its innocent eyes, burned behind her eyelids. She fumbled for a pen light in her uniform pocket. A last-ditch effort. Her gloved fingers struggled for the switch. The weak beam sprang to life. Barely enough, a wavering finger of light that created more shadows. She held it in her mouth, clenched between her teeth, its plastic tasting faintly of fear. The combined flickering of the lamp and the pen light offered meager, dancing illumination. It was not ideal, but it was all she had. She leaned closer, straining her eyes, face inches from the incision. Her vision blurred, not from tears, but from focus. A cold dread crept over her skin, a premonition of failure, of something unspeakable. The storm raged, its fury mirroring her own. Wind howled, rain hammered, thunder seemed to shake the ground. She worked on, hands moving by instinct, guided by practice and responsibility. Her breath hitched with each tiny movement, each precise cut. She felt delicate tissues, the fragile life pulsating beneath her touch. The metallic smell of blood grew stronger, mixing with antiseptic and damp fur. She was drenched in sweat, her uniform clinging. Muscles ached, but she ignored the discomfort. Only the task remained, the fight for this small, precious life. She was absorbed, lost in the delicate work. As she meticulously closed the final layer of tissue, a faint sound, distinct from the storm, reached her. A subtle shift in the air. A presence. She froze, hands hovering over the puppy, heart leaping. She tried to tell herself it was the wind, a trick, but primal fear coiled in her stomach. She held her breath, listening intently, senses heightened by adrenaline. The sound came again, a barely perceptible scrape of leather against stone, a heavy, measured step. Not the wind, not the rain, a footfall. Her eyes, wearied and terrified, darted toward the kennel entrance, obscured by shadows. The pen light remained fixed on the puppy. A cold draft swept through the chilly outbuilding. Her blood ran cold. Every rule of Thorne Manor, every unspoken threat from Julian Thorne, flashed through her mind. She had been caught. The realization struck her, stealing her breath. Her fingers locked around the needle, pressing it into the puppy's skin with terrified strength. If she let go, if she faltered, she would spill everything. Then a blinding shaft of light cut through the gloom. It was a powerful, steady beam, far brighter than her penlight. The light swept across the floor, over cages, then settled directly on Sarah, the makeshift table, and the puppy. She squinted against the glare, her hand frozen mid-stitch. A long, imposing shadow stretched across the floor. It was impossibly tall, unnervingly broad. Her gaze, despite fear, slowly rose, following the beam upward. Her eyes, accustomed to being lowered, were now forced to confront the source. She felt the familiar weight of a stern, unyielding presence. Her breath hitched. The air grew heavy with unspoken power. The light held steady, revealing the dark, imposing silhouette of a man. His shoulders were broad, his posture rigid. The faint glow from her lamp and the flashlight danced off his expensive suit. Her heart lurched, plunging with dread. Her mind screamed the name she always avoided. It was Julian Thorne. The sudden beam of light pierced the heavy darkness of the kennel, cutting through the swirling dust and the scent of antiseptic and blood. It illuminated Sarah, hunched over the small, still form of the puppy, her hands stained, the rusty surgical tools glinting beside her. Julian Thorne filled the doorway, a colossal shadow against the storm-lashed night, his expensive suit a stark contrast to the grime and desperation of the scene. His presence alone seemed to suck the air from the small, makeshift operating space. Sarah froze, her breath catching in her throat, a cold dread washing over her with the intensity of a tidal wave. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat that threatened to burst through her chest. The small, fragile life beneath her fingers became inconsequential for a terrifying moment as her own survival instinct screamed. She had been caught, undeniable and exposed, in the act of her gravest transgression. The rules of the manor, silent but absolute, echoed in her mind. No defying Julian Thorne, no independent action, and above all, no looking him in the eye. Now she had done all three. Her head remained bowed, a desperate, ingrained submission, but her peripheral vision registered the slow, deliberate steps Julian took. Each movement was measured, predatory, like a hunter closing in on cornered prey. The beam of his flashlight moved with him, a stark, unblinking eye, sweeping over the steel cages, the concrete floor, then settling on her. The air grew heavy, thick with the unspoken gravity of the moment, and the distant rumble of thunder seemed to mock her futile efforts at secrecy. She imagined the fury in his eyes, the cold, calculating anger that would surely precede a swift and brutal consequence. A shiver ran down her spine, not from the cold, but from the certainty of her impending doom. She had known the risks, accepted them, yet the reality of being discovered by Julian Thorne himself was far more terrifying than any nightmare. Her fingers, still resting on the puppy's tiny, cooling body, twitched. She wanted to pull them away, to hide the evidence of her forbidden skill, but they felt strangely locked in place, a final, defiant testament to her mission. Julian stopped a few paces away, the light from his flashlight painting a harsh circle around Sarah and the wounded pup. The silence that followed was suffocating, punctuated only by the distant wail of the wind and the rhythmic drip of water from a leaky roof. Sarah could feel his gaze, a palpable weight on her head, her shoulders, her blood-stained hands. She expected a sharp command, a question, an accusation, anything to break the agonizing quiet. But he said nothing. He simply stood there, an immovable, judging presence. Her mind raced, desperately searching for an explanation, an excuse, a plea that might soften the inevitable. But there was none. She had broken every rule. She had risked everything for a creature deemed disposable by the very system that now held her captive. Her past as a veterinarian, her true self, was laid bare in this single damning tableau. The exhaustion from the long hours of work, the tension of the surgery, the sleepless nights, all converged into a single, overwhelming wave of despair. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, gone, hot and unwelcome, threatening to betray her last vestiges of composure. She focused on the puppy again, a small, fragile anchor in the storm of her terror. Its tiny heart still beat, faintly, a testament to her skill, a silent plea for more time. She had not finished. The critical part of the surgery was done, but there were still sutures to close, aftercare to administer. It felt utterly absurd to continue her work under the direct, unwavering scrutiny of the man who held her life in his hands. Yet, some instinct, some ingrained dedication urged her forward. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she lowered her gaze further, concentrating on the delicate task before her. Her hands, despite their trembling, found the needle and thread, a familiar weight. The soft click of the instruments, the gentle tug of the suture, these small, precise movements were a desperate attempt to regain a semblance of control in a situation utterly devoid of it. She could still feel Julian's eyes on her, a chilling pressure. They were not just observing her actions, she sensed, but dissecting her very being. She imagined the questions forming in his sharp mind. How did a maid possess such knowledge? Why would she risk everything for a mere animal? Who was she, truly? These questions were the very ones she had spent years burying, sealing away beneath layers of anonymity and subservience. Now, under the harsh glare of his flashlight, her carefully constructed facade was crumbling to dust. Her breath hitched, a small, involuntary sound she immediately regretted. Julian remained a silent sentinel, his dark form barely perceptible beyond the intense beam of light. His piercing gray eyes, usually so cold and unreadable, seemed to linger. They swept over the small, vulnerable puppy, then settled on Sarah's focused, trembling hands. There was a flicker, an almost imperceptible shift in their depths, something unidentifiable. It was not anger, not yet, not openly. It was a raw, intense observation, a calculating assessment that sent a fresh wave of unease through Sarah. She could not decipher it, could not place it, and that made it all the more terrifying. Her inner voice screamed for her to stop, to beg for mercy, to explain, but what explanation could possibly suffice? She was a maid, a ghost in this grand house, whose only purpose was to clean and serve. To reveal her past, to speak of her passion for healing, would be to unravel everything, to expose the very core of her hidden life. The metallic tang of fear filled her mouth, thick and bitter. She pressed on, her fingers moving with an automatic precision born of years of training. Each stitch was a tiny act of defiance, a quiet declaration of her true nature. The small puppy offered no resistance, lying still and limp, its tiny chest rising and falling with agonizing slowness. Its fragile vulnerability mirrored her own, exposed and utterly dependent on the whims of a powerful, dangerous man. The cold from the concrete floor seeped into her knees, a constant, chilling reminder of her precarious position. Julian's gaze intensified, a palpable weight that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. He was not looking away. He was watching every minute detail, every tremor of her hand, every drop of blood. He was not judging her, not yet, but absorbing her, dissecting her. The lack of an immediate, furious outburst was almost more unsettling than any shouted command. It spoke of a deeper, more profound analysis, a cold assessment that promised a more intricate, perhaps more devastating, consequence. A single tear finally escaped, tracing a hot path down her grimy cheek, but she ignored it. Her focus remained steadfastly on the puppy, her last bastion of control. She would not stop. She could not. To abandon the tiny creature now would be to abandon herself, to surrender completely to the fear that threatened to consume her. Her throat ached with unshed sobs, a silent testament to the pain and the profound loneliness of her situation. The scent of the kennel, usually a comforting mix of straw and animal, now felt oppressive, laced with the metallic smell of blood and the sharp, clean scent of disinfectant. The weight of Julian's stare pressed down on her, an invisible hand pushing her further into the cold reality of her capture. She finished the last stitch, her hands stiff, her body aching with tension. The puppy, though still terribly weak, was breathing more steadily now, a small, fragile victory purchased at an unimaginable cost. Julian remained utterly silent, his expression a mask of impenetrable stone. His eyes fixed on her revealed nothing of his thoughts, his intentions, or the judgment he surely harbored. Sarah, trembling uncontrollably now that the immediate surgical task was complete, continued to work, cleaning the wound, bandaging the tiny body, convinced in her heart that her fate was irrevocably sealed. The cold steel of the forceps felt like an extension of Sarah's own trembling hand. Every breath she took tasted of old concrete and the metallic tang of blood. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a grim orchestra accompanying the howling storm outside. Julian Thorne stood like a monument of silent judgment, his presence a heavy cloak in the dim flickering light. His eyes, she felt, burned holes through her concentration, yet she dared not meet them. Her world had shrunk to the tiny, struggling form beneath her fingers, a fragile life hanging by a thread. The puppy's breathing was a shallow, desperate rasp against the furious wind that rattled the kennel door. Sarah's vision blurred at the edges, a combination of fatigue, fear, and the intense strain of the task. She felt the delicate tissue yield under her touch, her movements precise and automatic, guided by years of muscle memory she had thought long buried. The air was thick with unspoken tension, a silent battle waged between her desperate skill and the overwhelming power of the man who watched her. Each minute stretched into an eternity, punctuated only by the relentless thrashing of the storm outside. Rain hammered against the corrugated metal roof, a drumming that threatened to drown out the puppy's faint whimpers. Sarah's brow was slick with sweat, despite the chill seeping through the kennel walls. Her fingers, usually steady and calm, now shook with a mixture of adrenaline and pervasive cold. She focused on the internal damage, a blockage she was painstakingly trying to clear. Julian's silhouette, dark and imposing, never wavered. He was not just watching, he was absorbing, dissecting. Sarah could feel the weight of his gaze, not just on her hands, but on the desperate set of her jaw, the fine tremor in her shoulders, the quiet intensity radiating from her. She knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that her life hung in the balance as much as the puppy's. One wrong move, one sign of incompetence, and her fate would be sealed within these walls. A low growl rumbled from the mother dog's cage, a warning that seemed directed at the storm, not at Sarah. Even the massive creature seemed to understand the gravity of the moment, its usual ferocity muted by the fragile hope of its offspring's survival. Sarah worked under the flickering emergency light, the shadows dancing around her like predatory specters. She whispered reassurances to the tiny pup, her voice barely audible above the tempest. Her mind raced, cataloging every detail of the procedure, every potential complication. She remembered the warmth of a fully equipped operating room, the hum of monitors, the sterile scent of antiseptics. Here, there was only the raw, visceral reality of life and death, illuminated by a single weak bulb. The desperate courage to defy the rules of Thorne Manor was fueled solely by the puppy's innocence. She could not, would not, let it die. A sudden violent gust of wind tore through a small crack in the wall, sending a fresh shiver down Sarah's spine. Her thin maid's uniform offered little protection from the pervasive cold. The metal instruments she held were frigid against her skin. She felt a profound loneliness, isolated in this desperate act, watched by a man who held her very existence in his hands. Yet a stubborn resolve settled deep within her, a refusal to break, to surrender. She made a small, crucial adjustment, her breath catching in her throat. The obstruction was stubborn, clinging with a tenacity that mirrored the puppy's own fight for life. Sweat trickled down her temple, blurring her vision for a moment. She blinked it away, her hazel eyes, usually downcast, now wide with fierce concentration. This was her purpose, her truth. Stripped bare in the face of death, Julian Thorne watched without expression. He watched the way her slender fingers manipulated the cold steel, the precision in her movements, the gentle care she took with the tiny, fragile body. He noted the lines of strain around her eyes, the quiet strength that belied her demure appearance. He saw a woman utterly consumed by her task, driven by something far deeper than mere duty. This was not a maid. This was a healer. This was something he had not expected to find in the cold, unyielding halls of his manor. The storm outside intensified, a crescendo of thunder shaking the very foundations of the outbuilding. A lightning flash momentarily illuminated the entire kennel, revealing the stark drama of the scene. Sarah bent low, her face etched with grim determination. The small, pale pup, its life flickering. Julian, a dark, silent sentinel. The air crackled with raw energy, both from the elements and the potent, unspoken tension between the two figures. Sarah felt a slight shift beneath her fingers, a tiny release. Hope, sharp and sudden, pierced through the veil of her exhaustion. Her heart gave a wild, hopeful lurch. She worked quickly, her movements gaining a renewed surge of energy to finish the critical phase. Just as her hands completed the delicate work, a sound, faint but undeniably present, broke through the cacophony of the storm. A weak, breathy cry. It was barely a whimper, a sound so small it could have been lost in the roar of the wind, but it was there. The puppy, its small body still and lifeless moments before, stirred. A tiny gasp. A fragile, desperate sound of life. Sarah froze, her tools hovering, her eyes fixed on the creature. A wave of profound relief washed over her, so potent it threatened to buckle her knees. She felt the sting of tears behind her eyes, hot and unexpected. The sound seemed to cut through the heavy atmosphere, a fragile thread connecting the storm outside to the desperate hope within. Julian Thorne's head tilted almost imperceptibly. His piercing gray eyes, which had been fixed on Sarah's hands, now shifted to the small, living creature on the table. A flicker, almost imperceptible, crossed his usually stoic features. Sarah carefully, gently, closed the incision. Her hands were still, but a tremor ran through her entire body, a delayed reaction to the immense pressure. She reached for a clean cloth, wiping away the last traces of blood, her gaze never leaving the puppy. It was alive. It was truly alive. The exhaustion was absolute, yet a deep, quiet triumph settled within her. She heard a soft rustle, a sound distinct from the storm's fury. Her eyes, still brimming with unshed tears, finally lifted. They met Julian Thorne's gaze for the first time since he had appeared. There was no anger, no immediate retribution, only a profound, unsettling stillness. Julian moved then. His movements were fluid, deliberate, and utterly devoid of haste. Sarah watched, her breath caught in her throat, as he reached for the collar of his expensive overcoat. It was a dark charcoal, custom-tailored, made from the finest wool, its silken lining visible for a brief moment, a symbol of his world, of untouchable power and immense wealth. He shrugged it off, the heavy fabric falling away from his broad shoulders. The scent of expensive cologne, a clean, sharp aroma, momentarily filled the cold air, clashing with the smells of animal and blood. Sarah's mind reeled. What was he doing? Was this a prelude to something worse? A twisted game before the final punishment? Her heart began to pound anew, a frantic drumbeat of apprehension. He took a single, measured step towards her, the coat draped over his arm. Sarah instinctively flinched, pulling back slightly, her hands still resting protectively over the puppy. Her body was braced for a blow, for a harsh word, for anything but this silent, inexplicable approach. Julian stopped just inches away. His eyes, usually unreadable, seemed to hold a flicker of something she could not quite name. A glint of respect, perhaps, or a stark recognition. He did not speak. He simply extended his arm, holding the heavy coat. And then, with a gesture that was both unexpected and profoundly gentle, he draped the bespoke overcoat over Sarah's shivering shoulders. The warmth was immediate and overwhelming. The thick wool settled around her, a cocoon against the piercing cold of the kennel. The weight of it, the sheer luxuriousness of the fabric, felt alien and utterly surreal. It carried the faint, distinctive scent of Julian Thorne himself, a powerful, masculine presence that now enveloped her. Sarah froze, her entire body rigid with shock, her fingers still stained with blood, instinctively clutched at the lapels of the coat. She felt the fine, smooth silk of the lining against her neck, the warmth seeping into her chilled skin. It was an act so completely out of character, so utterly defiant of everything she knew about Julian Thorne, that her mind struggled to process it. Her eyes, wide with astonishment, slowly lifted. They met his once more. This time there was no fear, only a raw, disbelieving wonder. Julian's expression remained unreadable, yet there was a subtle softening around his eyes, a depth she had never witnessed before. His gaze held hers, an unspoken dialogue passing between them. The storm continued its rage outside, a wild symphony against the sudden, profound stillness within the kennel. Rain lashed against the windows, thunder rumbled in the distance, but inside a new silence had fallen, heavy with significance. Sarah clutched the warm, heavy coat, its unexpected comfort a physical manifestation of a shift she could not yet comprehend. For the first time she looked at Julian Thorne, not as her terrifying employer, not as the ruthless mafia boss, but as something else entirely. A raw, unspoken connection, fragile yet potent, formed between them in the storm-swept kennel. The scent of expensive cologne, faint and lingering on the heavy overcoat, became Sarah's secret comfort. It was a strange warmth, a dangerous warmth, she knew. She kept the coat folded neatly in her small room, a forbidden artifact that spoke of a moment she could not fully comprehend. Her fingers often brushed against the smooth fabric, remembering the unexpected weight of it on her shoulders, the sudden cessation of her trembling. The kennel, once a place of dread and desperate secrecy, transformed into her sanctuary. The small puppy, now named Whisper, thrived under her diligent care. She chose the name for its fragile, hopeful sound, a contrast to the fierce silence of its imposing mother. Whisper's tiny body, once cold and still, now pulsed with a vibrant, demanding life. Sarah's hands, accustomed to the delicate precision of surgery, now applied gentle strokes, comforting touches. She fed Whisper milk from a small bottle, watching the ravenous suckling, feeling the insistent nudges of its head against her palm. Each feeding was a small ritual, a quiet affirmation of life won from the brink. Whisper's fur, once matted and dull, grew soft and surprisingly plush. Its eyes, now fully open, held a bright, intelligent spark. Sarah spent hours with the puppy, talking to it in hushed tones, her voice a balm in the hushed, cavernous space of the kennels. She cleaned its enclosure meticulously, ensuring every surface was spotless, every blanket fresh. The massive mother dog, who had once watched her with unnerving stillness, now regarded her with a settled calm. There was an unspoken truce between them, a shared understanding forged in the crucible of a near loss. Julian Thorne's visits were as silent and unsettling as they were frequent. He appeared without warning, a tall, dark silhouette framed in the kennel doorway. He never spoke, never offered a word of praise or instruction. His gaze, however, spoke volumes. It swept over the clean straw, the contented puppy, and always, inevitably, settled on Sarah. She would feel the weight of his eyes on her back as she changed Whisper's bedding, or as she offered the small dog a piece of boiled chicken. Her heart would beat a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a drum against the silence. It was a different kind of fear now, laced with a strange, unsettling awareness. She no longer felt the acute terror of discovery, the dread of impending punishment. Instead, she felt observed, studied, perhaps even understood in a way no one ever had. His presence was a palpable force, a quiet hum in the air that made her skin prickle. She would feel the sudden urge to look up, to meet his intense gray eyes, and now she found she could. The unwritten rule of the manor, the strict avoidance of the master's gaze, seemed to have evaporated for her, at least in the confines of the kennel. He would simply hold her gaze, his expression unreadable, before turning and disappearing as silently as he arrived. The other staff members, however, had not missed the subtle, yet seismic shift in the manor's rigid hierarchy. Whispers began to circulate through the servants' quarters like a cold draft. Thomas, the stoic groundskeeper, had seen Sarah Jenkins walk past Julian Thorne in the main hall. He had seen her eyes, for a split second, meet the master's. The air had crackled with unspoken tension, but no sharp reprimand had followed. No icy dismissal from Liam O'Connell. It was an anomaly, a breach of protocol that should have resulted in immediate dismissal at best. Emma, the young scullery maid, clutched her silver tray a little tighter. She had watched from the kitchen window as Julian Thorne himself walked towards the kennels, not once but several times a week. And each time, she knew, he was going to see the quiet maid who saved the puppy. The whispers grew louder, filled with a mix of awe, trepidation, and a little envy. Sarah Jenkins, the maid who always kept her head down, was no longer invisible. She was a focal point, a strange new variable in the manor's carefully maintained order. Liam O'Connell, Julian's head of security, was a man who lived by observation. His watchful, steely blue eyes missed nothing. He had seen the subtle changes in Julian, the slight softening around the edges of his formidable presence whenever Sarah Jenkins was mentioned, or even simply in her vicinity. He had noted the increased frequency of Julian's visits to the kennels, a place the master rarely frequented. He had seen the maid Sarah, her head no longer perpetually bowed, her gaze sometimes meeting Julian's without immediate consequence. It was deeply unsettling. Liam's mind, a finely tuned instrument for threat assessment, began to whir. Julian Thorne did not act on impulse. He did not deviate from routine without a profound reason. This maid, this quiet, unassuming woman, had become that reason. Liam found himself watching Sarah Jenkins with a new intensity. He observed her as she went about her duties, her movements precise, almost economical. He noted the way her hands, capable and strong, performed even the most mundane tasks with an underlying grace. He saw her gentle patience with whisper, a stark contrast to the rough efficiency of the other kennel staff. His suspicion was not malicious, but pragmatic. Julian Thorne, his boss, his loyalty absolute, was exhibiting an unprecedented interest in a domestic employee. Such interest, in their world, was rarely benign. It either signaled a vulnerability, a potential weakness that could be exploited, or a hidden strength that needed to be understood. Liam began to pay closer attention to her schedule, to the small, unremarkable details of her life within the manor. He noted her quiet solitude, her lack of close friendships among the other staff. She was an enigma, a blank slate in a world where everyone had a file, a history, a known quantity. He remembered the night of the storm, the blood, the strange tableau in the kennel. Julian's cold, authoritative voice had been absent, replaced by a silent, intense focus. And then the coat. Liam had seen Julian remove his expensive, bespoke overcoat and place it on her. It was an act of protection, an act of unexpected deference from a man who commanded absolute obedience. This alone was enough to pique his professional curiosity. What was it about this woman that could elicit such an uncharacteristic response from Julian Thorne? Liam followed her movements through the manor, a silent, watchful shadow. He saw her return the overcoat, carefully folded, to Julian's study, leaving it on a precise spot on the antique mahogany desk. He saw Julian later pick it up, not with his usual indifference, but with a deliberate, almost possessive touch. The small gestures, the unspoken interactions, painted a picture of a connection that transcended the master-servant dynamic. This was dangerous territory. The manor's walls were built on absolute control, on predictable hierarchies. Sarah Jenkins was an unpredictable element. One evening, as the last light of dusk faded beyond the sprawling manor grounds, Liam found himself summoned to Julian's private study. The room was bathed in the soft glow of a single desk lamp, casting long shadows across the heavy leather-bound books. Julian sat behind his massive desk, a half-empty glass of amber liquid in his hand, his piercing gray eyes fixed on some distant point. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and expensive cigar smoke. "Liam," Julian's voice was a low rumble, barely disturbing the quiet. "The maid, Sarah Jenkins." Liam stood ramrod straight, his hands clasped behind his back. "Sir?" Julian took a slow sip from his glass. His gaze finally settled on Liam, cold and direct as always, yet with a subtle flicker of something unidentifiable. "She is an interesting individual." Liam waited, his mind already anticipating the unspoken request. He knew Julian's way of speaking, the nuances of his directives. Julian leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Find out about her. Everything." He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly. Her past, her history, where she came from, why she is here. The words hung in the air, a silent command. There was no direct mention of the puppy, no reference to the kennel, just the stark instruction to uncover the truth behind the quiet maid. Liam felt a grim satisfaction. His suspicions had been validated. He simply nodded, his face impassive. "Understood, sir." The unraveling had begun. The silence in Thorne Manor, once a shroud that allowed Sarah to move unseen, now felt like a taut string, vibrating with unspoken expectations. Julian Thorne's subtle command to Liam had set something in motion, a current shifting beneath the polished floors. Sarah felt it in the charged air, in the way the other staff now avoided her gaze with a new intensity, a mix of fear and curiosity. She could no longer simply exist within the manor shadows. She was seen, and that visibility was a terrifying threat to the carefully constructed anonymity of her life. Whisper, the small puppy, had become the unlikely center of this new dynamic. His recovery was remarkable, a testament to Sarah's skill and relentless care. Each day, the tiny creature grew stronger, his steps more confident, his small barks filling the kennel with a fragile joy. Julian Thorne would visit, often in the late evenings, when the manor was settling into its hushed rhythm. He never announced his presence. He simply appeared, a formidable shadow in the doorway. Sarah would be there, changing Whisper's bandages or coaxing him to eat. She would feel the shift in the air, the subtle scent of expensive cologne, and then she would know he stood behind her. She never turned fully, maintaining the maid's posture, a slight bow of her head. Yet their eyes would meet in the reflection of Whisper's shining bowl, or in the brief moment she offered him a small, hopeful smile, a genuine expression that transcended her role. His gaze, usually a cold, impenetrable shield, held a new depth. It was not kindness, not warmth, but an intense, calculating observation that seemed to peel back layers she had so carefully placed. In those moments, the world outside the kennel faded. It was just Sarah, the puppy, and Julian Thorne, connected by the fragile life they had both, in their own ways, fought to save. These were the heart-pounding instances, the brief, illicit exchanges that spoke volumes without a single word. One morning, Sarah found a package on her small bedside table, nestled among her meager belongings. It was wrapped in plain brown paper, entirely anonymous. Her fingers trembled as she unwrapped it. Inside lay a brand new medical textbook, its pages crisp and clean. The spine read, "Advanced Veterinary Internal Medicine." A knot tightened in her stomach. Who could have known her needs so precisely? Who would dare to place such an item in her private space? Her mind raced, fear a cold hand squeezing her heart. She hid it quickly, burying it deep beneath her worn dresses, the smooth cover a stark contrast to the rough fabric of her life. Days later, another discovery. Near Whisper's enclosure, where she left his half-empty food bowl, she found a small bag. It contained specialized puppy food, the kind she knew was designed for young, recovering animals, far superior to the generic kibble the manor usually provided. It was an expensive brand, difficult to source. A wave of both gratitude and profound dread washed over her. These were not random acts. Someone was watching her, anticipating her unspoken thoughts, providing for her without revealing themselves. The thought alone made her skin crawl. Liam O'Connell's presence around the manor had become a constant, unsettling shadow. He no longer merely patrolled, he observed. Sarah felt his eyes on her as she moved through the corridors, scrubbing floors or dusting antique furniture. His usual brusqueness was still there, but now it was tinged with an almost predatory watchfulness. He never confronted her, never spoke more than necessary. Yet his gaze lingered, dissecting her actions, her expressions, searching for something. She knew he was Julian's shadow, his loyal enforcer, and his scrutiny meant Julian's curiosity was deepening, not fading. The whispers among the other staff grew louder, though they hushed quickly whenever Sarah approached. She caught fragments. The boss and the new maid. He visits the puppy when she's there. Did you see her looking at him? Their fear of Julian was palpable, but their awe and suspicion of Sarah were growing, fueled by the inexplicable shift in dynamics. Her once invisible status was shattering, leaving her exposed. Each murmured word felt like a tiny cut, slowly bleeding away her safety. Sarah began to feel a constant thrum of anxiety beneath her skin. Every floorboard creak, every distant voice, every shadow in the dimly lit hallways seemed to hold a hidden message. She found herself checking the lock on her door more frequently, though she knew it offered little real protection within Thorne Manor's walls. Her sleep became restless, haunted by images of her past, of the life she had so desperately tried to outrun. The thought of Julian uncovering her identity sent shivers through her. She had built this wall around herself, brick by painful brick, and now it was crumbling. One afternoon, Julian found her in the kennels, meticulously cleaning Whisper's new bedding. He didn't speak, but his presence filled the small space. Sarah felt her heart thump against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She kept her head down, her movements precise. "He is recovering well." Julian's voice, low and resonant, broke the silence. Sarah's breath hitched. "Yes, sir. He is strong." She kept her voice steady, deferential. He took a step closer and she could feel the heat radiating from him. The scent of his cologne filled her senses. "You have a way with animals." It wasn't a question, but a statement, an acknowledgement of her hidden skill. Her hands, calloused from years of manual labor, trembled slightly as she smoothed the blanket. "I try my best, sir." He paused, a long, heavy silence stretching between them. "He is important to me." "I understand, sir." Her voice was barely a whisper. She did understand. Whisper was more than just a she. He was a connection to the ferocious mother dog, a symbol of Thorne's power, and now a strange, unspoken link between her and Julian. Julian turned then, his footsteps echoing softly as he left. Sarah remained frozen, her body tense, her mind reeling. He knew. He didn't just suspect. He knew something significant about her abilities, something that went beyond the actions of a mere maid. The air felt heavy, thick with implications she dared not voice. Later that week, another anonymous package appeared. This time it was smaller, heavier. Inside, she found a set of finely crafted surgical sutures, the kind used for delicate, precise work. Her fingers traced the smooth, sterile thread. Her old mentor, Dr. Evans, used to say that good sutures were the mark of a truly skilled surgeon. This gift was too specific, too personal. It wasn't just thoughtful, it was pointed. It was a message. Julian Thorne was not merely curious. He was investigating her, perhaps even testing her. The careful anonymity she had cultivated for years was eroding, bit by bit. She had sought refuge in being invisible, in blending into the background of a dangerous world. Now she was being brought into focus, illuminated by Julian's intense scrutiny. This was a man who did not tolerate secrets, especially not from those within his domain. The weight of his attention felt like a physical burden, pressing down on her shoulders. She missed the days when her greatest concern was avoiding his direct gaze, not the unsettling depth of it. Her hidden sketchbook, tucked away beneath the loose floorboards in her room, felt like a ticking bomb. She imagined him finding it, flipping through the detailed anatomical drawings, the precise notes on medical procedures, the coded entries that spoke of a life she had abandoned. The thought alone made her heart race, her breath shallow. Every creak of the floorboards outside her door sent a jolt of panic through her. She was living on borrowed time, she knew it. The only question was when the truth would finally shatter her fragile peace. The small, shared moments with Julian, however brief and silent, became a dangerous addiction. A brief meeting of eyes over Whisper's wagging tail, a fleeting nod of acknowledgement when she presented him with the puppy's latest progress report. These were sparks in the oppressive darkness of her life. Small comforts that simultaneously terrified her. She was drawn to the depth in his gaze, to the unexpected thoughtfulness of his anonymous gifts. But she was also profoundly aware of the chasm between them, the power imbalance, and the terrifying consequences if her truth was fully revealed. One rainy evening, after a long day of chores and a final visit to Whisper, Sarah returned to her small room. The air was damp and cold, carrying the scent of wet earth from outside. She lit her small oil lamp, casting flickering shadows on the whitewashed walls. Her eyes swept across the familiar, sparse furniture, searching for anything amiss. Her gaze landed on her bedside table, a small wooden stand scarred with time. There, resting delicately on the worn surface, was an object she had not left. It was a small, antique veterinary tool, its silver gleaming softly in the lamplight. The handle was carved bone, smooth and cool to the touch, and the tip was a fine, curved probe, exquisitely detailed. It was a diagnostic tool used for precise examination. Her fingers, trembling, reached out and grazed its cold surface. It was unmistakably old, unmistakably professional, and unmistakably placed there by someone who knew exactly what it was. A cold, sharp chill traced its way down Sarah's spine, settling deep in her bones. Julian knew. He knew everything. The silence in Thorne Manor, once a shroud that allowed Sarah to move unseen, now felt like a taut string, vibrating with unspoken expectations. Julian Thorne's subtle command to Liam had set something in motion, a current shifting beneath the polished floors. Sarah felt it in the charged air, in the way the other staff now avoided her gaze with a new intensity, a mix of fear and curiosity. She could no longer simply exist within the manor's shadows. She was seen, and that visibility was a terrifying threat to the carefully constructed anonymity of her life. Whisper, the small puppy, had become the unlikely center of this new dynamic. His recovery was remarkable, a testament to Sarah's skill and relentless care. Each day, the tiny creature grew stronger, his steps more confident, his small barks filling the kennel with a fragile joy. Julian Thorne would visit, often in the late evenings when the manor was settling into its hushed rhythm. He never announced his presence. He simply appeared, a formidable shadow in the doorway. Sarah would be there, changing Whisper's bandages or coaxing him to eat. She would feel the shift in the air, the subtle scent of expensive cologne, and then she would know he stood behind her. She never turned fully, maintaining the maid's posture, a slight bow of her head. Yet their eyes would meet in the reflection of Whisper's shining bowl, or in the brief moment she offered him a small, hopeful smile, a genuine expression that transcended her role. His gaze, usually a cold, impenetrable shield, held a new depth. It was not kindness, not warmth, but an intense, calculating observation that seemed to peel back layers she had so carefully placed. In those moments, the world outside the kennel faded. It was just Sarah, the puppy, and Julian Thorne, connected by the fragile life they had both, in their own ways, fought to save. These were the heart-pounding instances, the brief, illicit exchanges that spoke volumes without a single word. One morning, Sarah found a package on her small bedside table, nestled among her meager belongings. It was wrapped in plain brown paper, entirely anonymous. Her fingers trembled as she unwrapped it. Inside lay a brand-new medical textbook, its pages crisp and clean. The spine read Advanced Veterinary Internal Medicine. A knot tightened in her stomach. Who could have known her needs so precisely? Who would dare to place such an item in her private space? Her mind raced, fear a cold hand squeezing her heart. She hid it quickly, burying it deep beneath her worn dresses, the smooth cover a stark contrast to the rough fabric of her life. Days later, another discovery. Near Whisper's enclosure, where she left his half-empty food bowl, she found a small bag. It contained specialized puppy food, the kind she knew was designed for young, recovering animals, far superior to the generic kibble the manor usually provided. It was an expensive brand, difficult to source. A wave of both gratitude and profound dread washed over her. These were not random acts. Someone was watching her, anticipating her unspoken thoughts, providing for her without revealing themselves. The thought alone made her skin crawl. Liam O'Connell's presence around the manor had become a constant, unsettling shadow. He no longer merely patrolled, he observed. Sarah felt his eyes on her as she moved through the corridors, scrubbing floors or dusting antique furniture. His usual brusqueness was still there, but now it was tinged with an almost predatory watchfulness. He never confronted her, never spoke more than necessary. Yet his gaze lingered, dissecting her actions, her expressions, searching for something. She knew he was Julian's shadow, his loyal enforcer, and his scrutiny meant Julian's curiosity was deepening, not fading. The whispers among the other staff grew louder, though they hushed quickly whenever Sarah approached. She caught fragments. The boss and the new maid. He visits the puppy when she's there. Did you see her looking at him? Their fear of Julian was palpable, but their awe and suspicion of Sarah were growing, fueled by the inexplicable shift in dynamics. Her once invisible status was shattering, leaving her exposed. Each murmured word felt like a tiny cut, slowly bleeding away her safety. Sarah began to feel a constant thrum of anxiety beneath her skin. Every floorboard creak, every distant voice, every shadow in the dimly lit hallways seemed to hold a hidden message. She found herself checking the lock on her door more frequently, though she knew it offered little real protection within Thorne Manor's walls. Her sleep became restless, haunted by images of her past, of the life she had so desperately tried to outrun. The thought of Julian uncovering her identity sent shivers through her. She had built this wall around herself, brick by painful brick, and now it was crumbling. One afternoon, Julian found her in the kennels, meticulously cleaning Whisper's new bedding. He didn't speak, but his presence filled the small space. Sarah felt her heart thump against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She kept her head down, her movements precise. "He is recovering well." Julian's voice, low and resonant, broke the silence. Sarah's breath hitched. "Yes, sir. He is strong." She kept her voice steady, deferential. He took a step closer, and she could feel the heat radiating from him. The scent of his cologne filled her senses. "You have a way with animals." It wasn't a question, but a statement, an acknowledgement of her hidden skill. Her hands, calloused from years of manual labor, trembled slightly as she smoothed the blanket. "I try my best, sir." He paused, a long, heavy silence stretching between them. "He is important to me." "I understand, sir." Her voice was barely a whisper. She did understand. Whisper was more than just a dog. He was a connection to the ferocious mother dog, a symbol of Thorne's power, and now a strange, unspoken link between her and Julian. Julian turned then, his footsteps echoing softly as he left. Sarah remained frozen, her body tense, her mind reeling. He knew, he didn't just suspect. He knew something significant about her abilities, something that went beyond the actions of a mere maid. The air felt heavy, thick with implications she dared not voice. Later that week, another anonymous package appeared. This time it was smaller, heavier. Inside, she found a set of finely crafted surgical sutures, the kind used for delicate, precise work. Her fingers traced the smooth, sterile thread. Her old mentor, Dr. Evans, used to say that good sutures were the mark of a truly skilled surgeon. This gift was too specific, too personal. It wasn't just thoughtful, it was pointed. It was a message. Julian Thorne was not merely curious. He was investigating her, perhaps even testing her. The careful anonymity she had cultivated for years was eroding bit by bit. She had sought refuge in being invisible, in blending into the background of a dangerous world. Now she was being brought into focus, illuminated by Julian's intense scrutiny. This was a man who did not tolerate secrets, especially not from those within his domain. The weight of his attention felt like a physical burden, pressing down on her shoulders. She missed the days when her greatest concern was avoiding his direct gaze, not the unsettling depth of it. The small, shared moments with Julian, however brief and silent, became a dangerous addiction. A brief meeting of eyes over Whisper's wagging tail, a fleeting nod of acknowledgement when she presented him with the puppy's latest progress report. These were sparks in the oppressive darkness of her life, small comforts that simultaneously terrified her. She was drawn to the depth in his gaze, to the unexpected thoughtfulness of his anonymous gifts. But she was also profoundly aware of the chasm between them, the power imbalance, and the terrifying consequences if her truth was fully revealed. One rainy evening, after a long day of chores and a final visit to Whisper, Sarah returned to her small room. The air was damp and cold, carrying the scent of wet earth from outside. She lit her small oil lamp, casting flickering shadows on the whitewashed walls. Her eyes swept across the familiar, sparse furniture, searching for anything amiss. Her gaze landed on her bedside table, a small wooden stand scarred with time. There, resting delicately on the worn surface, was an object she had not left. It was a small, antique veterinary tool, its silver gleaming softly in the lamplight. The handle was carved bone, smooth and cool to the touch, and the tip was a fine, curved probe, exquisitely detailed. It was a diagnostic tool used for precise examination. Her fingers, trembling, reached out and grazed its cold surface. It was unmistakably old, unmistakably professional, and unmistakably placed there by someone who knew exactly what it was. A cold, sharp chill traced its way down Sarah's spine, settling deep in her bones. Julian knew. He knew everything. The heavy manila folder landed on Julian Thorne's polished mahogany desk with a soft, decisive thud. Liam O'Connell stood silently opposite, his presence as solid and unyielding as the stone walls of Thorne Manor. Julian's gaze flickered from the plain cover of the folder to Liam's watchful, steely blue eyes. A faint scent of old paper and something distinctly chemical, perhaps a hint of disinfectant, wafted from the documents. The silence in the study was profound, broken only by the distant, rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock in the hall. Liam spoke, his voice a low, gravelly murmur. "Everything you asked for, sir. And then some." Julian picked up the folder. Its weight felt substantial in his hand, hinting at the depth of information contained within. He ran a thumb over the rough texture of the cardboard, a small, involuntary gesture of anticipation. He did not immediately open it. Instead, he studied Liam, searching for any tell, any flicker of surprise or judgment in the man's impassive face. There was none, just the usual unwavering loyalty. Liam was a mirror, reflecting only what was expected. "You found her," Julian stated, not as a question, but as a confirmation. His voice was calm, measured, revealing nothing of the curiosity that had been steadily growing inside him. He had known Liam would deliver. Liam always did. Liam merely nodded once, a subtle inclination of his shaved head. The trail was well covered. She was thorough. "A ghost," Julian mused, a faint, almost imperceptible curve playing on the corner of his lips. He recalled the maid's downcast eyes, the quiet efficiency, the way she moved through the manor like a shadow. And yet, she had saved the pup. She had defied everything he stood for, everything his rules represented, for a fragile life. That contradiction had fascinated him. It had stirred something within him he rarely acknowledged. He opened the folder. The first page was a summary, a photograph clipped to the top left corner. It was Sarah Jenkins, but not as he knew her. Her hair was down, framing a face less guarded, more open, perhaps even smiling. The image was grainy, from years ago. Beneath it, a name, Dr. Sarah Jenkins, veterinarian. The words resonated in the quiet room, echoing the unspoken truth he had already begun to suspect. His eyes moved swiftly over the paragraphs detailing her academic achievements, her residency, the glowing recommendations from professors and colleagues. She had graduated top of her class. She had specialized in advanced surgical procedures. The paper rustled softly as he turned the page, the crisp edges cool against his fingertips. Each line painted a picture of a life utterly removed from the one she now led within his oppressive walls. The details were clinical, factual, yet Julian felt a strange heat in his chest. This woman, this quiet maid, had once commanded respect, had been at the forefront of her demanding profession. He remembered her hands in the kennel, stained with blood, trembling but steady, her movements precise, almost surgical. He had dismissed it then as a desperate act, an unexpected talent. Now he understood it was her very nature, her deepest calling. He continued to read, absorbing the information like a sponge. Dates, addresses, former colleagues. A life meticulously built, then meticulously dismantled. Then came the section marked personal. His gaze sharpened, the intensity in his piercing gray eyes deepening. This was the missing piece, the reason for the ghost. He read about a sudden, devastating loss, a tragedy that had shattered her world, driving her from her practice, from her identity. The words were terse, professional, devoid of emotion, yet Julian could almost feel the weight of it, the profound grief that must have consumed her. He imagined her then, a vibrant young doctor, suddenly broken, seeking anonymity, seeking refuge. The manor, his manor, had become her sanctuary, a gilded cage where she could hide in plain sight, a place where eyes were never meant to meet his, where she could exist without truly being seen. The irony was not lost on him. He, Julian Thorne, the man who commanded an empire, had inadvertently provided cover for a woman fleeing her past, a past that now held him captive with his quiet strength. Julian closed the dossier. The silence stretched between him and Liam. The scent of old paper lingered. He looked up, his eyes meeting Liam's. "She saved the pup," Julian said, his voice flat, yet there was an undercurrent Liam recognized as something significant. Liam nodded again. "She did." "She's a formidable woman," Julian concluded, leaning back in his chair, the expensive leather creaking softly. He dismissed Liam with a subtle wave of his hand. Liam turned and left, his footsteps hushed, leaving Julian alone with the weight of the new truth. Julian felt a growing sense of anticipation, a complex mixture of respect, intrigue, and a burgeoning possessiveness. He knew now that the dynamics had shifted irrevocably. The game had changed. Meanwhile, in her small, sparsely furnished room, Sarah Jenkins felt a chill that had nothing to do with the draft from the window. The air seemed thinner, heavier, as if the very walls of the manor were pressing in on her. For days, an unsettling awareness had been building, a prickling sensation on the back of her neck. She had felt eyes on her, not just the usual watchful glances of the other staff, but something more deliberate, more penetrating. The gift of the antique veterinary tool, placed so carefully on her bedside table, had confirmed her deepest fears. Julian knew, or at least he was close to knowing. Her hands, usually so steady, trembled slightly as she moved about her duties. She polished the ornate silver, her reflection a blurred, anxious image in its gleaming surface. She dusted the heavy oak furniture, each movement deliberate, practiced, yet her mind raced. How much did he know? What would he do? The questions swirled like angry birds in her mind, pecking at her carefully constructed peace. After her shift, she retreated to her room, the sanctuary that had become her prison. The scent of lavender, which she used to mask the lingering smell of cleaning supplies, seemed faint and ineffective now. She felt a desperate need to reclaim some small part of herself, to hold on to the identity she had so carefully buried. She knelt, her knees protesting slightly on the worn rug, and reached for the loose floorboard beneath her bed. Her fingers fumbled for a moment, then gripped the familiar edge, lifting it with a soft creak. Beneath, nestled among a few faded letters and a pressed flower, lay her hidden sketchbook. Its leather cover was smooth and cool under her touch, worn soft from years of handling. The faint aroma of charcoal and old paper, tinged with a hint of antiseptic, rose from its pages. It was her secret heart, her silent confession, a tangible link to the life she had once led. The last time she had held it, she had felt a strange mix of comfort and fear. Now only fear remained. She held the book in her lap, her thumb tracing the embossed pattern on its cover. The thin light filtering through her window, a dusty gray against the gathering dusk, illuminated the worn edges. Her eyes, usually downcast, were wide, reflecting a quiet desperation. She knew with a certainty that made her stomach clench, that this book was a liability. If Julian were to find it, her last shred of anonymity would be stripped away. It was a testament to her past, a defiant declaration of her true self in a world that demanded her erasure. A wave of intense grief washed over her, a familiar ache in her chest. The sketchbook contained not just the technical drawings of animal anatomy, the precise notes on surgical procedures, but also the sketches of beloved pets, the faces of animals she had saved, and the memory of the life she had loved, a life tragically lost. Destroying it felt like destroying a part of her soul, like erasing the very essence of who Sarah Jenkins truly was. Her fingers tightened around the book. She could tear out the pages one by one, watching her past dissolve into meaningless scraps. She could burn it, reducing her memories to ash, leaving no trace. The thought was both terrifying and strangely tempting. It would be a final, desperate act of self-preservation, a complete surrender to the anonymity she had sought. But could she do it? Could she truly sever ties with the woman she had been, the passion that still burned within her? A tear slipped down her cheek, tracing a path through the faint grime of the day. It tasted salty, a bitter reminder of the pain that had driven her here. She closed her eyes, clutching the sketchbook to her chest, feeling the faint imprint of its contents against her skin. The decision was agonizing. To destroy it meant safety, perhaps. To keep it meant defiance and a terrible vulnerability. She hesitated, caught between the terror of exposure and the profound sorrow of self-erasure. Just as the last sliver of daylight faded from her window, a soft knock echoed at her door. Sarah startled, her heart leaping into her throat, a frantic drum against her ribs. She froze, the sketchbook still pressed tightly against her. She heard a hushed voice, one of the junior maids calling her name. "Sarah? Miss Jenkins?" She took a deep, shaky breath, quickly tucking the sketchbook back into its hiding place beneath the floorboard. Her hands were still trembling as she smoothed the rug back into place. "Yes?" she managed, her voice barely a whisper. "Mr. Thorne requests your presence," the maid said, her voice hushed, almost reverent. "In his private study. Immediately." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Julian Thorne's study, a place no maid had ever been invited, a sanctum of power and secrets, a place that now awaited her, beckoning her toward a confrontation she had both dreaded and, perhaps, unconsciously anticipated. Sarah felt a cold dread spread through her, yet beneath it, a strange, fierce resolve began to harden. Her past was no longer a secret. Her fate was about to be laid bare. The heavy oak door of Julian Thorne's study stood before Sarah, an imposing barrier to a life she thought she had buried. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, echoing in the hushed silence of the manor's grand hall. This was the threshold of her past, the moment her carefully constructed anonymity would shatter. She pushed the door inward, the massive slab of wood swinging open on silent hinges. The air inside was thick and warm, smelling of old leather, expensive cigars, and a faint metallic tang she now associated with Julian's dangerous world. Bookshelves lined the walls, stretching from floor to ceiling, filled with volumes Sarah knew Julian had never read. A grand mahogany desk dominated the center of the room, its polished surface gleaming under the soft light of a single lamp. Julian sat behind it, a dark, motionless figure, his piercing gray eyes already fixed upon her. He did not speak, nor did he gesture for her to approach. He simply watched, his gaze a physical weight, peeling back layers of her disguise. Sarah walked into the room, her spine rigid, her chin lifted just a fraction. This was no longer the deferential maid entering her master's domain. She was a woman facing her judge, and something deep inside her refused to cower. She stopped a respectful distance from the desk, her hands clasped loosely in front of her, but her gaze met his directly. There was no fear in it now, only a weary defiance. Julian picked up a slim folder from his desk, its cover a stark, plain gray. He opened it slowly, deliberately, the soft rustle of paper the only sound in the vast room. His eyes scanned the contents, though Sarah knew he had memorized every word. "Sarah Jenkins," he finally said, his voice a low, resonant murmur that seemed to fill every corner of the study. "Born in Manchester, 30 years ago. Graduated top of your class from the Royal Veterinary College in London. Specialized in critical care and exotic animals. A rising star in your field, they said." He paused, his gaze lifting to hers, cold and unwavering. "Then 2 years ago, you vanished. Your flat was emptied, your practice closed, your name scrubbed from every professional registry. You became a ghost." He closed the folder with a soft thud. "Until you reappeared here, as a maid who can perform emergency surgery on a dying puppy with a rusty scalpel and a pilfered first aid kit." A cold dread snaked its way up Sarah's spine, not from fear of him, but from the stark, unvarnished truth of his words. He knew everything. The relief that the charade was over mingled with a sharp, familiar pang of loss. She felt the ghost of her past identity, the capable, confident veterinarian, stir within her. Her fingers locked around each other, pressing hard against her palms. "I am Sarah Jenkins," she stated, her voice quiet but steady. The tremor she felt deep inside did not reach her tone. "And what you have in that folder is mostly true." Julian leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. "Mostly? What part is not true, Miss Jenkins?" His tone was devoid of emotion, a dangerous calm that had suggested profound displeasure lay just beneath the surface. "Or perhaps, what part of your story do you wish to change now that your secrets are exposed?" Sarah swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. This was the moment. The truth, raw and painful, had to be spoken. "I did not choose to disappear, Mr. Thorne," she began, her voice trembling now, despite her best efforts. "I was forced to. My past was not something I willingly discarded." Julian merely watched her, his expression unreadable. He offered no encouragement, no hint of compassion. This was an interrogation, a demand for answers, nothing more. The silence stretched, heavy and expectant, compelling Sarah to continue. I loved my work, she confessed, a catch in her voice. The memories rushed forward, a torrent of images she had tried so hard to suppress. The frantic nights in surgery, the joy of saving a life, the deep connection with the animals she treated. It was everything to me. My calling, my purpose. She took a deep, shuddering breath, her eyes unfocused for a moment as she gazed into the past. 2 years ago, I was working at a small private clinic. One evening, a man brought in a severely injured dog, a magnificent German shepherd. It had been shot. He insisted I treat it, no questions asked. Her hands began to clench and unclench, the memory of physical ache. The man was imposing, dangerous. I knew instinctively he was not someone to cross. A bitter taste filled her mouth, the acrid flavor of fear and powerlessness. I saved the dog. I was good. It recovered completely under my care. Her gaze returned to Julian, a flicker of pride and profound sorrow in her hazel eyes. But during the treatment, I saw things, heard things, glimpses of a world I never knew existed, a world of violence and shadows. Julian remained silent, his posture rigid, absorbing her every word. He seemed to understand the implications without her needing to spell them out. The man, he was grateful, Sarah continued, her voice gaining a fragile strength. But he also understood I had seen too much. He told me I had two choices, disappear or disappear permanently. She looked down at her clasped hands, remembering the cold, chilling finality in the man's voice. He made it clear that my life and the lives of those I cared about would be in danger if I stayed. A tear, unbidden, traced a path down her cheek, leaving a cold streak. My family, my parents. I couldn't risk them. I packed a small bag, left a note saying I needed a break, and vanished. The words tumbled out, each one a release of a burden she had carried for so long. I became Sarah Jenkins, the maid, invisible, unremarkable, safe. She looked up, her eyes pleading, not for pity, but for understanding. That is the tragedy, Mr. Thorne. Not just losing my profession, but losing myself, giving up everything I was, everything I worked for, to simply survive. She ran a hand over her face, wiping away the tear, regaining a semblance of composure. When I saw your puppy, dying, neglected, I couldn't help myself. It was the first time in 2 years I felt like myself again, like the vet I used to be. The risk didn't matter then, only saving that life. The room was utterly still. Sarah's confession hung in the air, a raw, exposed truth. Julian's gaze had softened, almost imperceptibly, the cold chips of gray ice melting just enough to reveal something akin to contemplation. He still held the dossier, but his attention was fully on her, on the trembling woman before him who had just laid bare her soul. Suddenly, a soft purring sound filled the silence. Sarah had not even realized that Whisper, the rescued puppy, had padded silently into the study, following her from the moment she had left her room. The tiny creature, now plump and healthy, rubbed its head against Julian's leg before settling down at his feet, a warm, vibrating bundle of life. The sound was a gentle counterpoint to the heavy, emotional weight of Sarah's revelation, a fragile bridge between the darkness of her past and the stark, uncertain present. A heavy hush followed Sarah's last words in Julian's study. The scent of leather and cigar smoke now mixed with a fragile hope in her chest. Whisper, the small puppy, stirred softly at Julian's feet. Julian remained still, his gray eyes unblinking, fixed on Sarah. His intense gaze stripped away her uniform, her past, revealing only the truth of her being. Sarah's hands still trembled slightly from the confession. Her gaze, once habitually downcast, now met his directly. A strange lightness, a sense of freedom came with her exposed secret. There was no more hiding. She felt a faint warmth spread through her, a readiness for whatever Julian Thorne decided. Julian leaned back in his large, dark leather chair. Its soft creak was the only sound apart from Whisper's rumble. He took a slow breath. His eyes, usually unreadable, held a complex depth Sarah felt she could almost decipher. She saw no anger, no condemnation, but a peculiar assessment mixed with something softer. He had heard her tragedy, her vulnerability, and still he looked at her. Sarah, he finally said, his voice a low, resonant murmur. It was the first time he spoke her name with such clarity, without formal detachment. The sound sent a shiver through her, a mix of apprehension and thrilling recognition. You are more than you appear. He paused, his gaze lingering on her hazel eyes. Much more. A flicker of color rose in Sarah's cheeks. She had tried so hard to be invisible, a shadow in this opulent prison. To be seen, truly seen by Julian Thorne, was both terrifying and profoundly validating. She swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. Her life hung in the balance, yet a quiet strength welled up. She had faced worse and survived. Julian shifted, leaning forward, forearms resting on his polished desk. Your skills are undeniable, he continued, his tone measured. You saved Whisper. You risked everything, knowing the consequences. His eyes narrowed just a fraction. That takes courage, Sarah. A kind of courage I respect. Sarah's heart gave a sudden thump. Respect, from Julian Thorne. The word resonated in the stillness, an acknowledgement she had never dared to dream of. She wanted to speak, but no words would form. Her breath caught in her throat. I offered you my coat that night, Julian said, recalling the stormy kennels. A gesture, a protection. It was not merely for the cold. He watched her closely. I offer it again now in a different form. Sarah's gaze lifted to his, a question in her eyes. What protection? The air crackled with unspoken possibility. She remembered the coat's heavy warmth, the unexpected sense of safety it had provided. This manor has many needs, Julian said, gesturing around the study. My animals are among them. You are a master of your craft, Sarah. A true veterinarian. To waste such talent, to allow you to remain merely a maid, would be inefficient. The word inefficient struck her. So typically Julian Thorne, cold and calculating. Yet the sentiment recognized her true worth. A strange smile tried to form on her lips, a sensation she had not felt in years. I am offering you a choice, Julian stated, his voice firming. It was an authority tempered by something new, acknowledging her own agency. To remain here at Thorne Manor, not as a servant, not as a ghost, but as yourself. Sarah's breath hitched. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a drumbeat of hope and fear. To be herself after so long hiding? It seemed almost too good to be true. You would be invaluable, he continued, a trusted advisor, the resident expert for all matters concerning my animals. A position of consequence, under my direct protection. He watched her, his gray eyes piercing. Your past, your skills, your presence here would be an asset. The weight of his words settled. This was an invitation into his world. Dangerous yet powerful, a terrifying prospect, but one promising an end to her crushing anonymity, her suffocating fear. To be truly valued, truly seen, after so long was overwhelming. She imagined refusing, disappearing back into shadows, forever looking over her shoulder. The thought was unbearable. Her life had been a series of escapes. Julian Thorne now offered a chance to stop running, to build something new, even within Thorne Manor. Her gaze drifted to Whisper, who lifted its tiny head. Its soft, dark eyes looked up with innocent trust. She had saved this creature, and in doing so, she had saved herself. Her skills could bring life, forge unexpected connections. What about the risks? Sarah finally asked, her voice a little hoarse, but steady. His world was dangerous. Julian's lips curved into the faintest smile. Risks are inherent in all things, Sarah, especially in my world. His gaze hardened slightly. But you would be under my protection. Those under my protection are rarely touched. It was a brutal truth, yet reassuring. A thrill of fear, yes, but also empowerment. She would not be alone, not helpless. She would be valued. This was a chance to reclaim her life, to stop being a shadow. He offered a pathway out of quiet despair. Her eyes met his again. An unspoken understanding passed between them. It transcended their former roles. Two strong wills finding common ground. I accept, Sarah said, her voice clear and firm. It was a conscious, deliberate choice, a step into the unknown, a future beyond anonymity and fear, a future where her skills were a strength, A subtle softening occurred in Julian's piercing gray eyes. It was fleeting, almost imperceptible, but Sarah saw it, a hint of satisfaction. He gave a slight nod. Good, he said, the single word carrying the weight of many promises. He rose from his chair, his movements fluid and powerful, and walked around the desk. He extended a hand, offering to help her rise. Sarah placed her hand in his. His grip was firm, warm, unexpectedly gentle. As she stood, the last vestiges of her maid persona fell away, replaced by the quiet confidence of the woman she truly was. Sarah Jenkins, veterinarian, standing on the precipice of a new, dangerous, and deeply compelling life within Thorne Manor. Their eyes met again, holding, and in that shared glance, a deep, unspoken bond of mutual respect and burgeoning affection was forged, shattering the old dynamic entirely.